In the last two chapters, we talked about where stress at work actually comes from. First, how things fall apart when expectations aren't clear at the start. Then, how even good work drifts when no one pauses midstream to check whether everyone is still aiming at the same thing. Those weren't motivation problems, they were clarity problems. Now we get practical. Most people think the real work is about effort, how much you put in, how late you stay, how fast you respond. But after watching thousands of projects and careers unfold, the real split isn't between people who care and people who don't. It's between those who own clarity and those who hope it shows up. Anyone can start strong. Energy is easy. What's rare is a shared definition of good, especially when pay, bonuses, and advancement are on the line. Without it, even the best teams end up guessing, overworking just in case, quietly wondering if their effort will count when it actually matters. That's when drift begins. Not because anyone failed, but because everyone is aiming at a slightly different target and doesn't know it yet. Here's the truth that matters. People you can't replace don't wait for clarity. They create it before the work starts. They protect it when pressure shows up. And when the work is done, there's no awkward, "So, was this what you wanted?" at review time. There's visible progress, clean wins, and outcomes that get rewarded fairly. That's what makes them trusted, promotable, and hard to replace.
I remember early in my career thinking that good work would just speak for itself. I had a new manager, a real opportunity in front of me, and I wanted the outcome to matter. Recognition, trust, maybe a bonus. We talked about the project, but the definition of good stayed fuzzy. So I did what most people do. I nodded, filled in the gaps myself, and got to work. A week in, the unease showed up. Not because the work was hard, but because I couldn't say, in one sentence, what success actually looked like. That was the moment I changed my approach. Instead of pushing harder, I paused and went back to my manager and said calmly, "Let me say this back in one sentence so I know we're aligned on what a win is." She corrected one small thing. That was it. No drama. Later, working with a peer, I used the same move. "Before we keep going, let me read this back to make sure we're aiming at the same target." She exhaled and said, "I'm glad you asked. I wasn't sure either." Nothing about the workload changed, but the agreement did. We finished clean. Credit wasn't awkward. Expectations weren't debated. The win was visible, shared, and easy to recognize. That's when it clicked for me. Clarity isn't something you hope for. It's something you create out loud, early, and then you protect it as the work unfolds.
Yeah, I've seen this play out over and over. People assume the ones who get raises are the extroverts or the political ones. That's not it. It's the people who manage the room just enough to say, "Let's agree on what a win looks like before we keep moving." They don't wait for their manager to magically clarify it. They propose it. One sentence, plain language. Then, when things get busy and pressure ramps up, they restate it. Same target, same agreement. At the end, they finish against exactly what was named. That's what turns compensation from a guessing game into something predictable. You're not hoping someone remembers your effort. You're delivering against something everyone agreed mattered. The rules were visible the whole time. And when that happens, trust goes up, stress drops, and the whole team works calmer because no one's wondering where the goalposts are.
This isn't just about projects or daily tasks. It's about compensation, bonuses, raises, the moments where effort either turns into a win or disappears into memory. Nothing dramatic happens when those go wrong either. No one's cheating the system. The stress comes from fuzzy agreements about what actually earns the reward. The people who avoid that don't demand more, they get clearer. They ask the clarity question early. What does a win look like for both of us here? They say the agreement out loud, write it down, and come back to it when pressure hits. That's how effort turns into something visible. That's how wins get shared instead of debated. And that's how trust grows, because both sides know the rules, and both sides can win inside them. Let's be clear about what we're really talking about now. This isn't just about projects or daily tasks. This is about raises, bonuses, promotions, the outcomes people quietly hope their effort turns into. Most frustration at work doesn't come from being underpaid. It comes from not knowing what actually earns more. The people who struggle aren't lazy or naive. They're working inside invisible rules. The people who advance faster do one thing differently. They turn compensation into an agreement instead of a mystery. They don't wait to be told how raises work. They ask, early, what would a win look like for both of us here? That question changes everything.
I learned this the hard way. Early on, I wanted a raise, maybe a bonus, but I didn't want to sound entitled or awkward. So I worked harder, stayed later, took on more. And when review time came, the feedback was fine, but vague. That's when I realized I'd never actually asked what would earn more. The next time I did it differently. I sat down with my manager and said, I want to be really clear. What results would need to be true for this role to justify a raise? Not emotional, not demanding, just specific. We named 3 things: measurable, time-bound. I wrote them down and sent them back in a follow-up. Halfway through the year, I checked in again. Here's how I'm tracking against what we agreed. Anything you'd adjust? When review time came, there was no debate, no selling. We weren't negotiating, we were confirming. That's when I realized clarity isn't uncomfortable, ambiguity is.
Here's what I've seen over and over. People assume compensation decisions are subjective, so they treat them like politics. But most managers actually want something simpler: proof against a known target. The problem for most people is nobody names the target. High performers do. They don't ask, do you think I deserve a raise? They ask, what outcomes would make this role worth more? That shifts the whole conversation. Now it's not personal, it's operational. And this works peer-to-peer too. When teams agree on what winning looks like, credit stops being awkward, bonuses stop being confusing, promotions stop feeling random. The people who get ahead aren't guessing what matters. They're executing against an agreement everyone can see.
Here's the takeaway that matters. If you want more pay, more responsibility, more trust, you don't argue for it at the end. You agree on it at the beginning. Clarity is how professionals protect themselves at work. Ask what earns the win. Say it back in plain language. Write it down. Revisit it while there's still time to adjust. That's how effort turns into advancement. Not harder work, not longer hours, just visible agreement. When both sides know how they win, work gets calmer, trust grows faster, and compensation becomes fair because it was never hidden in the first place. Here's where clarity stops being something you reach for when things go wrong and starts becoming a habit people recognize you for. The most respected professionals don't wait for confusion before they get clear. They make clarity routine. They're known as the person who defines what good looks like, puts it somewhere visible, and calmly comes back to it as work unfolds. Not to control anyone, just to keep everyone aimed at the same target. That consistency is what turns clarity into trust. When people know you'll always make expectations explicit, they relax. That's the habit we're talking about.
This is where people get it wrong. They think writing things down or restating expectations makes them look rigid or insecure. In reality, it does the opposite. It signals maturity. I've watched managers, peers, whole teams start trusting someone more simply because they're reliable about alignment. They don't rely on memory. They don't spring surprises. They don't wait until the end to argue about what mattered. They say, here's what we agreed to, and everyone nods because they remember it the same way. That's not micromanagement. That's professionalism. And it's why those people get listened to when things get busy.
I had to learn how to make this feel normal. Early on, I worried I'd sound stiff or overly formal, but the move is actually light. It sounds like, let me write this down so we're both clear, or I want to say this back to make sure I've got it right. I started doing it at the beginning of projects, then again halfway through, and once more near the end. Not every detail, just the outcome, timing, and what would count as a win. What surprised me was how much people appreciated it. Managers trusted me more. Peers felt protected. Nobody felt boxed in. They felt safe. That's when it clicked. Clarity isn't pressure, it's relief.
Here's the takeaway. Being good at clarity isn't about having the perfect framework. It's about repetition. The same intentional moves, every time. Name what good looks like. Put it somewhere visible. Come back to it before drift turns into frustration. Do that consistently, and people start to rely on you. Not because you work harder, but because outcomes are predictable. That's how respect gets built. That's how trust compounds. And that's how you become impossible to replace.
Once you start doing this, you'll notice something. Meetings get shorter, fewer just checking messages, predictable results. People start trusting the system again. That's when you know it's working. Give it a try this week. Just one clear agreement, said out loud and written down. We'll see you all in Section 2.